Now, the late former ambassador to the UN, Dumisani Kumalo, has been hailed as an outstanding diplomat. His funeral took place at the West Park Cemetery in Johannesburg today. ENCA's Kailihla Kumalo was there, and he joins me now for this conversation. Now, Kaya, this individual has been dubbed as one person who actually furthered South Africa's policy of a global multilateralism. Let's talk a little bit about his contribution, not only to a democratic dispensation, but really looking at building a global community and furthering Africa's agenda in that.
Well, that's right, Faith. Dating back to the days just before the democratic dispensation, you look at the role that he played just in terms of raising awareness in the U.S. He was exiled for over 20 years. So you know that the U.S. Congress was seized with the question of apartheid, whether must it declare it as a crime against humanity or not. So also the issue of the sanctions. So he was one of those lone voices right in the U.S. that really played that pivotal role in making sure that eventually the U.S. Congress is adopting an act really just calling for sanctions on South Africa, apartheid South Africa. Now, looking into the democratic dispensation, you got an opportunity to go and serve right at the UN for South Africa. And obviously, Pretoria had an opportunity of serving within the Security Council. There were a lot of issues that he had to deal with. For example, the issue of Zimbabwe at the time. But also, apart from that, Faith, during the course of the funeral, a lot of tributes that were coming across, they were really describing the rare traits that he possessed. They were talking about the fact that he was a safe pair of hands when it comes to the African agenda in the UN, but also apart from the UN in so many other platforms.
Of course, another note is the fact that he started his career off as a journalist somewhat in the 1960s. Many individuals don't know that there's almost like this transition. You mean starting off as a journalist and realizing that actually we cannot just sit by and watch a country go into disarray, but something needs to be done. And he perhaps is one of those individuals that took up that baton and that call and got into politics.
Well, certainly, Faith, a very rare crop of journalists at the time, right at the height of apartheid. But apart from that, so he was an activist by his own rights. And maybe just, Faith, if we can just take a listen to just a bit of the eulogy delivered by the Minister in the Presidency, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma.
Even in those cold corridors in the United Nations, his belting laughter could be heard across and beyond the walls. And Ambassador Kumalo approached every task with the same vigor. Whether he was chairing the non-aligned movement, the Security Council, the groups of 77 plus China, and many others.
Now, Kai, you know, it speaks such volumes about the need for South Africans. This is a conversation, and probably you and I have even had, how we need to start understanding what some of our individuals who are in politics, our veterans, have actually done to ensure that this country is actually a democratic state. Because one such worker by the former ambassador actually is not necessarily known, but it's sad that it's known at the time of his death in terms of just how much contribution is made to a Republic of South Africa that is a democratic South Africa.
Well, certainly, Faith. And also it just goes back to the issue of looking at the very unsung heroes we have in this country. So he belongs right into that group of South Africans who really paid a very heavy price. The families harassed by the apartheid regime. But also apart from that, he was respected in so many parts of the world. So since his passing, there has been an outpouring of condolences just from within the United Nations itself, and also some of the former colleagues who served with him as diplomats. But also a very challenging time for South Africa. We know that we've just gone back to the UN Security Council. Mammoth amount of challenges we face as South Africa. So the likes of Kumalo would have played a very critical role in terms of sharing the knowledge, the expertise that are needed in making sure that, for example, the UN itself is reformed to serve the developing nations. So the likes of Kumalo really understood the agenda of the South, the countries located in the Southern Hemisphere. So it's a very key question.
And of course, another question would be, was he successful during his tenure in being able to raise up some of those issues? I mean, knowing the fact that he was there to really lift up the African agenda in the United Nations, but also looking at the agenda of global multilateralism, was he able to be that individual that stood up and be listened to? And obviously coming from South Africa, look at where South Africa stands in consideration of global politics.
He commanded so much respect. There was a point, you just look back into 2006 when the US was planning to invade Iraq. So as much as South Africa was not within the UN Security Council, but he was able to state categorically that it was a wrong move to go and attack Iraq. And today, the aftermath, he was really proven very much right. Even today, the aftermath, what you see, what is currently happening, the instability. But apart from that, we know that when it comes to Africa, he served in so many structures in terms of resolving conflicts, the raging conflict in Burundi at the time. So this was somebody who really just commanded so much respect amongst his contemporaries. And it was really interesting to see when there was a memorial service on Thursday at the Or Tambo building in Pretoria, where some of the diplomats, they were saying he really just personified what is South Africanness, the qualities, the generosity that he had. So a true diplomat par excellence.
Well, Kai, definitely a conversation and one soul that will be missed by many. They're speaking about the former late ambassador to the United Nations, and that, of course, is Dumisani Kumalo.